really, in my opinion, more difficult to be a leader if you don't have clarity of who you are and how you're going to lead yourself. Until you get that, it makes it more difficult to lead others. And so I really encourage people to get clarity on what they're all about. And it can change, and that's okay. But really having a clarity of what you're all about has got to be your foundation. In sports, business, you always talk about being great at the basics or the fundamentals, right? Well, one of the fundamentals is really knowing what you stand for and what you're willing to, go to battle with, right?
Welcome back to the Sparks of Gratitude podcast, everyone. We are so grateful for you joining us today. We have a special guest, Coach Jim Johnson. Welcome to the conversation.
Thanks, Randy. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, I am thrilled. We've been connected recently through other friends, and Jim has a story to tell. I'm very curious to hear the background of all the story and what's happened since then. But about 20 years ago, I remember, it is almost 20 years ago, I think, coming up this February, There was a story I remember watching on ESPN. I'll let Jim tell the story. One of those inspiring stories that bring tear to your eyes and just, create a motivation and just make you want to get out and do something good, right? And have belief in humanity. That's one of these types of stories. And then you want to go and watch the movie about it. Yeah. Is one of those types of stories that inspired millions of people. And I'm going to let Jim tell that story. But most of all, I want to learn what went underneath that story, because this story is a moment in time.
Right.
So if you can share with us this moment in time, but then how this moment became meaningful. There's so much underneath that. And then what's happened since then?
Yeah. So,
hey there, everyone. Did you know that beyond hosting the Sparks of Gratitude podcast, I am also an estate planning attorney, and I love gratitude, and my law firm is proud to sponsor this video. Since 2010, in my law practice, I have designed and delivered customized peace of mind with sophisticated estate planning made easy. So whether you need foundational estate planning, including revocable trusts, wills, powers of attorney, and healthcare directives, which is what most people need, or you might need advanced strategies such as irrevocable trust for asset protection or advanced estate tax planning, I am here to guide you every step of the way. Because at the end of the day, your peace of mind is my peace of mind. You can visit randallsparks.com and I can get started helping you plan for the future today. Now back to our podcast.
Well, I'll give you a little context. So I was a high school teacher and coach. I wanted to follow my dad's footsteps. He was my high school basketball coach, although I kid him that I must have got him out of the profession because he went into administration. None of my brothers got a chance to play for him. But my dad was a great model for me. And when I graduated from college, I met a young lady my junior year in college, and we've now been married for over 42 years. So that was a positive, in my college experience. Although the negative is that unfortunately, I was really into basketball, and I played 1 year, and I transferred to another college, and I got cut. And that was a very humbling experience. Ended up being a good experience later on because it helped me with perspective on coaching young people, because I kind of hit all the things. I was once the star of my team. I was once a reserve. Once I was cut, so you hit all those experiences, which is helpful as a coach because you're trying to get into the impact young people. And so that was good to have those different experiences. Although I wouldn't say that getting cut was my favorite experience for sure. Well, anyway, so my dream after I graduated from college, we got married, was to be a full-time phys ed teacher. And I wanted to coach, but my main sport was basketball. I wanted to be a head coach. And at 25 years old, Randy, my dream came true. For your listeners here, think about the first time you had a pretty big dream come true. And mine was, and it was coaching at a school about 20 minutes from where I grew up. And I was excited. The problem was the program wasn't very good. But of course, in my mind, I thought I was going to take this program from the outhouse to the penthouse, of course, in the first year. That was until, Randy, we won our second game. And then I led my team to 17 consecutive losses.
Wow.
And then, so it was a pretty humbling experience, and it's a long story, but the bottom line, I was in an interim position, and they decided not to renew my contract. So I guess, in other words, it's called being fired, which was pretty humbling at 25. Fortunately, I got a call from a local junior college coach. Ironically, for those of your listeners that follow basketball, you've probably heard the name. His name was Bill Van Gundy. And ironically, at that time, both his sons were coaching as well, but they were my age. And now they ended up being head coaches in the NBA. So you just never know. But anyways, Coach Van Gundy took me under his wing, and I learned a lot from him about leadership. And then with my own study, I started to become a student of leadership. And so doing that, I seems like there's a volume thing. Okay. So anyways, I got an opportunity to coach at another school, and I was there for 2 years. And then my real big dream came true. I got a chance to coach in my hometown. And in my last 27 years, I coached at two of the high schools. I grew up in the town, and there were three high schools. And there I started to do much better as a coach. We started to have winning records, but then I got known as the coach that couldn't win the big one. We having winning seasons, but then we would lose in our postseason tournament. And it was very humbling for me. Well, it was my seventh year, my final position. It was called Greece Athena High School. We had a young man come into our program that changed my life forever in a most positive way. His name was Jason McElwain. Everybody knows him as J-Mac. And J-Mac's on the autism spectrum. And he tried out for our junior varsity. I was the varsity coach. And after a few days of tryouts, my JV coach came in and said, Coach, we have this young man. He's not a very good player. He's very small in stature. He's learning disabled. He's on the autism spectrum, but I want to keep him in the program. I said, why is that? He said, because he's got the characteristics that you always tell us that we should look for. He's a team guy. He loves basketball. He wants to be part of something special. I said, great. So he served as team manager, and I started to get to know him. In fact, I tagged the nickname J-Mac because I couldn't pronounce his last name. Unfortunately, he liked it. And so what was interesting though, Randy, is I was getting to know him because he would sit on the bench because our JV and varsity games were back to back most of the time. He wasn't coming to our practice; he was coming to the JV. But after that season, he started coming to all our off-season workouts, and I was picking him up at his house, and I was getting close to him. So he tries out his junior year for the varsity. And he doesn't make the team, but I asked him to serve as the team manager for the varsity, and he quickly embraced that. And speaking of my can't win the big one, our first team meeting that year, I walk in the room with all our team there, and Jason immediately raised his hand. I said, yes, J-Mac. He says, Coach, we know you've never won the Section 5 championship. And I said, well, thanks, J-Mac, for the reminder. But this year is going to be different. I said, oh, yeah, why is that? He says, because we've developed this mantra that we're going to follow, and that is we're going to stay focused. We're going to help you win your first Section 5 championships. And I said, well, thank you. We had a good season that year, and we actually got to our postseason semifinal for the sixth time in my career, and we lose at the buzzer to our cross. And I am just devastated. In fact, I lose it at home. It's the first time but my wife was very wise, and she listened to my rant, and she said, Jim, you always talk about your mission, and I don't see part of your mission being a Section 5 champion. So you really got me back on what I was supposed to be all about. So Jason, again, comes to everything. His senior year, he tries out. And this year, I said to him, Jason, unfortunately, you're not quite good enough to make the team, but I want to give you a gift. And the gift is I'm going to give you a uniform for our final home game senior night. And ironically, Randy, I am writing a book about it because it was called A Coach and a Miracle. But I'll tell you the story very quickly in just a moment. But the crazy thing is that season we were expected to be really good. We won our first two games, then adversity struck, and our team got divided. And it's a long story, so I won't get into it. But the bottom line is, for those listening, is if you've ever been on a team that is divided, did you reach your potential? I would probably guess that you'd say no. And we were no different. Even though we were talented, we lost 3 out of our next 5 games. And we ended up having a heart-to-heart at a Christmas tournament between games where I showed some real vulnerability, something I really learned I want to share with people about leadership is you got to be willing to be vulnerable. And so after the first round of the Christmas tournament, we had a short practice the day of the next game. We were playing the host school. It was terrific. And the way I challenged them. I said, we're going to lose by 50 points tonight unless we unite. But the best thing I did is I said, guys, I don't have the answer, but you do. And I just opened it up. And finally, they started to share ideas, and I could start to see that we were going to come back together. And we played a great game that night. Although we lost in overtime, it showed what we could do. So we win 8 of our next 9 games going into senior night. I give J-Mac his first jersey on February 13th. Our senior night was February 15th. There was a rumor going around school that he slept in it for 2 straight nights. He was pretty fired up about that uniform. But it was really neat, Randy. I went through 30 senior nights. I was a head coach for 30 years, but that was the most profoundly touching to see Jason, instead of his white shirt and black tie that he always wore, he's donning number 52, which was way too big. But to see him embrace his parents was so cool. Well, the game begins. And I wanted to get Jason in, but in fairness, I had to get all our other players in that were regular team members before I put Jason in. But my goal was I wanted to see if he could score a basket. I thought if he could score a basket, that's a memory he'll have for the rest of his life. But just over 4 minutes to go, I point to him. He nearly ran on the court. He was so excited. Then what happened next touched me so deeply. What I didn't realize is our student body following, they called themselves the Six Men. One of our parents, he was kind of our unofficial photographer, made these pictures of Jason's face and put them on paint sticks like placards. And I had no idea they were doing this. So when Jason entered the floor for the first time ever, they gave him a standing ovation. They showed all those placards. And I'm usually pretty macho. I'm not going to cry at a basketball game, especially when I'm coaching, right? I sit down and tears start flowing down my face. I cannot believe how they received him. So he's in his first game. First time he touches the ball, he has a 3-pointer from the right corner. And literally the whole gym, we had about 900 people there. They stand up and he shoots a 3-pointer, and Randy misses by like 6 feet. And I'm a person of faith, but I kid people because I taught and coached in a public school. And I know you're not supposed to pray in the public schools, but I was praying, dear God, one basket. Well, the second possession, he has a much shorter shot for about 10 feet, and he lets it go. And this time it hit the backboard, hit the rim, and fell off. And the crowd groans, but I'm thinking, all right, we're getting closer. God's listening. Next possession, he has another 3-pointer. This time he lets it go. Magic. It goes in. The place just explodes. And I'm thinking to myself, God must be a basketball fan. Not only is he scored, he's got a 3-pointer. Can't get better than this, right? Wrong. And I want to fast forward and I'll come back and finish the game. 6 months after that game, I kid you not, Jason's boyhood idol was the late Kobe Bryant. And Jason's at the ESPY Awards in California. He's up for the greatest sports moment of the year. In fact, Jason used to sign his name, Jason J. Mac Kobe McElwain. That's how much he liked Kobe Bryant. So at the ESPYs, he's up for the greatest sports moment of the year. And one of the other 4 finalists was Kobe Bryant. So he meets his idol and beats him out for the ESPY. Well, how does he do that? Well, after that first 3, he comes down, he makes another 3. Then he makes a basket with his foot on the line. Then he missed a couple, and he made a couple. The place is just going bananas. And the 2 things I'll never forget, with a minute to go, I'm sitting on the bench, tears still flowing down my face. I cannot believe what I'm seeing. And I get a tap on my shoulder, and I'm shocked. I look behind me, and it's J-Mac's mother. And she whispers in my ear, Coach, this is the best gift you could ever give my son. What would you have done, Randy? Of course, I cried harder. Then this is how the game ends. With about 10 seconds to go, our opponent, Spencerport, they score, and our player takes the ball out of bounds. And normally he throw it to our point guard, but for whatever reason, he throws it right to Jason. So Jason's dribbling on the court, and I see the clock ticking down, 7, 6. I thought they were just going to go in and let him make a short shot, a layup. Oh, no, he slows down. It's almost like he's doing it for the camera. He pulls up like 2 feet behind the arc. And I'm thinking, Jason, don't shoot from there. You're going to ruin this moment. He launches this rainbow. Swish. I look over, and it was like the scene out of a movie, Rudy. The whole gym ran on the floor. Our players put him up on their shoulders. He got the game ball over his head. At this point, I had no idea how many points he has. And our public address announcer comes on and says, the leading scorer for Greece Athena tonight, J-Mac, with 20 points, including 6 3-pointers. And he was our leading scorer. It was just unbelievable. And, there's so many lessons we delve in to. And then the crazy thing is, I'll close this part of it by saying, Jason now it becomes a national and kind of a global celebrity because it exploded all over the world. Not my doing, just because it got out, right? It went from local TV to national TV to global. It was just crazy. But during that, we're now Jason's got to go back and be our team manager because you got to play in 6 regular season games to be able to play in the postseason. And he embraces his role, and we win our first championship that year. So it was just unbelievable season. But I coached for 35 years. I had so many wonderful experiences, had so many great players and parents and coaching staff. But that touched my heart. It's a memory. In fact, my wife, because I tell the story quite a bit, between my speeches and podcasts and all that, she goes, "Don't you ever get tired?" I said, "No, it touched my heart so deeply. I'll share it the rest of my life." So,
well, Coach, and people, you did mention that you've got this book, Coach in a Miracle. You sent me a copy of it. Thank you so much for this.
my
And I mean,
pleasure.
and you guys can look at this. I mean, go to Jim's website and you can get this, coachjimjohnson.com. I mean, you can find it, and there's a lot more there to it. So get the book. It's worth reading. So you mentioned something earlier. There's so many bits and pieces that I want to go into about this, but I believe that when we have these potent moments, the only reason that they have meaning and potency and they're that inspiring, there's enough investment underneath it to give it that value on top, right? And so talk to me about that for you.
Well, the one thing that there were so many lessons, but one that always jumps out to me was the fact that you always people talk about in becoming good at something. It's all the unseen hours that you put in that no one knows about, and that was the thing that because I had other team managers, but what was different about Jason was just his commitment. He came to everything. He was part of us, and so it just got me thinking. Is like, you know what? He deserves an opportunity because he's put the work in. He's willing to do the things that most people aren't willing to do, and so I think that was the real thing that I really share with people is that I always tell our players you got to deserve victory, and to deserve victory means you got to be willing to do the things that most people aren't willing to do. And Jason was willing to do that. And the other thing that I really learned that got magnified by Jason was that how much he put the team in front of him, and the fact that the team being successful was the most important thing to him. And I'll give you an illustration. It's one of the things I share in one of my presentations is that after we won our championship that year for the first time, and because the game got out around the world, right? So, normally we play in a big arena downtown, but we're not a basketball, hotbed. So, for a championship game, we might get 4,000 or 5,000 of a 10,000 seat arena. But because we had so much following, the place was sold out that night. And we start the game down 12-2. So it wasn't a very good start. But our kids just hung in there, and Jason was like their inspiration. And we rallied, and we ended up winning the game in the last 30 seconds. And it was crazy. But the amazing thing is after that season, Jason and I were interviewed by a lot of media all over the country and the world. And they would often ask him if we were doing it together, "Jason, what was the best thing about your senior season?" Of course, they're expecting him to talk about his game. And he'd throw him a curveball. He'd go, "The best thing was us winning the Section 5 championship. There was nothing close to that." And yet, the interesting little sidelight to that, Randy, is when I got after that championship game that we won, we had a lot of media there. Normally, there's only one person, but because it became national, we had probably 15 media there. And so I felt like I was an NBA coach with all these media around me. And I'll never forget one of the media person asked, "Coach, this is your first championship. How's it compare to the JMAC game?" And I said to him, "I'm really proud of my team, how we were able to come together and win a championship, but nothing has ever profoundly touched my heart and soul like the JMAC game." So I always tell people that when you're striving to find how to make your dreams come true, what I really learned is the best way to do that is to help others make their dreams come true.
Wow. So your wife said something too when you had lost, and you kind of got emotional about it or complaining about it, or, all the work you put in. Understandably, you were having your moment of venting,
Right.
but she said, "Well, wait a minute, this doesn't look like what your real mission is.
Right.
Focus on that." So tell me, what is your mission? What was it through this whole thing for her to be that sweet, loving, kind person to
Yeah,
say,
yeah.
okay, coach.
Well, when I started my journey of learning leadership, I became a very avid reader. I've probably read well over 1,000 books on leadership and team building. And, one of my all-time favorite books, you can relate to being out in Utah, is by Dr. Covey's Seven Habits. And when I read it, it's like he talked a lot about personal mission statement. And, I was pretty young when I read it, and I had no idea what the heck he was talking about. I was all into, just me. I didn't know, and you should do something bigger than yourself. But he stimulated my thinking, and I really got through. In fact, in some of my presentations and workshops, I give people steps on how they can, try to discover their personal missions. But it took me a while, and I started to think, well, I want to be a great role model. So that's where it started. I wanted to be a leader by example. And then number two is I wanted to help others make their dreams come true. And so my mission is to be an outstanding role model that makes a positive difference in the world by helping others make their dreams come true. And what I talked to both sports leaders and business leaders, and that's something I really try to push because, as I travel around the country, I'll ask that question, how many have their own personal mission statement? And it's usually a very small percentage, Randy, less than 10%. But I always come back to them. I say, you know what? It's really, in my opinion, more difficult to be a leader if you don't have clarity of who you are and how you're going to lead yourself. And until you get that, I think it makes it more difficult to lead others. And so I really encourage people to get clarity on what they're all about. And it can change. At 25, your mission might be something, and at 45, it may, and that's okay. But really having a clarity of what you're all about has got to be your foundation. In sports, business, you always talk about being great at the basics or the fundamentals, right? Well, one of the fundamentals is really knowing what you stand for and what you're willing to go to battle with, right?
So how can you find that clarity? How would you help me or somebody listening find that clarity for themselves? Because sometimes I find that I had a similar conversation. We talked about this before we started with another coach similar to you that helps people find their vision.
Yeah.
And Jim Hewling. And I think we brought something up like this where sometimes I know that something's out there, but it feels a little blurry. How do I bring that into focus and find clarity in what is meaningful to me and to find that purpose and mission? So how would you advise somebody to uncover and create clarity in what their vision can be?
Okay, so I'll give you a few steps that I recommend to people. So first one is I think you got to ask this question yourself a lot. Why was I put on this earth? Or if you're personal faith like you and I are, why did God put you on this earth? And I think you got to ask that question a lot and really start to stimulate your thinking. The second phase that I share with people is I think you have to get clarity of your core values. What are the things that are most important to you in understanding what those behaviors? For example, one of my core values is to respect all people. So, I really want to give clarity on, and that was one of our core values in our basketball program, is respecting others. But then, that's a nice statement, but what does that really mean? And that's, as a leader, you've got to demonstrate that by leading by example with your behaviors, and so that you're aligning your words and action. Because I talk to leaders a lot about how to build trust, and we could go through my formula on that. But so the second phase is really getting clarity of your values. And then the third thing is I believe it's got to be something that bigger than yourself and something that's fairly concise. So like if you notice with my mission statement, it's really just a couple sentences, so it just gives you a real foundation of what you're all about. And the last thing I say is that I want to stimulate your thinking, but it's probably not going to happen in 15 minutes. You're going to have to really think through and go, okay, what are your 3 or 4, maybe 5 most important values? How are you going to put those together to live a certain life? And then again, being bigger yourself. So it's got to be a cause. In my case, I want to help other humans, but it may be that you want to, help animals, or you want to help stop pollution. It could be, but it's got to be something bigger than yourself, but something that you dearly care about and have passion to make some kind of an impact on the world.
That's excellent help. So you brought up something earlier too, where you talked about vulnerability. And I think what I notice in my life is the more honest I can be with myself and sometimes opening up to others, and being vulnerable to the truth. Sometimes I might have real important core values and mission, that's bigger than me, that's grander than me. But then sometimes I feel like this dissonance and this lack of alignment because I have these values which I really believe in, right? And I think I've carefully identified them, and they're meaningful to me, and I believe in them, and I'm headed in a direction, something bigger than myself. But my actual behavior is not reflecting that. And sometimes I might not be totally aware of it, but I know I just feel something that's just this dissonance between that. But when I can pause and be honest with myself and vulnerable with myself, or when I have that kind friend like your spouse did that one evening, is to point out to you, well, wait a second, you're behaving in a way that doesn't reflect what your values are.
Right.
But so what can you share with us about those bumpy moments and that vulnerability?
Well, I think I could best share it by sharing a little story that happened to me when I was coaching, because I was real big. I have these 7 keys to be an effective leader. And one of them is, something we all hear, but I don't think a lot of times as leaders we do a great job, and that's leading by example. So my story is one of the things that, we had high standards for our players was that in our games where we traveled to another school, we wanted our players to look sharp. So we expected them to have a shirt and tie. But I got to admit, Randy, I didn't love shirt and ties myself. So one game on the road, I wore, I looked nice. I mean, I had a collar shirt and everything, a vest, but I didn't have a tie. And I'll never forget when we got off the bus, walking back to our school. And one of my parents said, "Hey, Coach, you always talk about being a role model for our sons. How come you expect them to wear a tie and you didn't?" And you know what? That's where I said to the parent, "You're absolutely right, and I am wrong, and this won't happen again." And so I think one of the things that really, to answer your question, is that we're human beings. So we may have really strong values and strong mission, but sometimes we make errors. And I think that's where the vulnerability and the willing to say, "Hey, I made a mistake and I will correct it." And, and I got to admit, I never did not wear a shirt and tie again because I understood, one of the things we always told our players is that, as we got more and more successful, you are always on stage. But it's something I remind leaders every day, whether you think or you're not, your team members are watching you all the time. And I'll give you another quick illustration. Like one of our high priorities was we expected our players to be on time. And if I came late, which I didn't because that was such a high priority, but if I did come late, I would apologize and say, "This is not something that I accept," and I may have a consequence for myself because our players certainly had a consequence if they came late without me knowing in advance. So I think those are things that one of the things I talk to leaders about is having few non-negotiables. But you can't have 100 rules. It's maybe 3 to 5 things that are high standards, where you're setting a foundation. But if those standards mean a lot to you, you better be the model for them. So being on time is important, and you're showing up late, that's not going to work. So.
Yeah, or maybe learn that we got to pick a different non-negotiable. It's
exactly.
one that we're not willing to keep.
Yeah. Without a doubt.
So something that I really admire about coaches is when I look back in time, I didn't play high school sports. I was a ski racer when I was in high school, and I engaged with coaches in different, but not through school-sponsored sports. But I've had coaches and influential people in my life. And when I look back, and I've done this exercise several times of who were impactful, influential people in my life besides the obligatory ones. My parents, right? Because their duty and their job is to raise me and teach me, and my parents did a wonderful job at that.
Right.
However, there's a time in my life when I am certain that my parents were just praying every day that I would listen to advice from somebody else that they would have given me. Right? Because there's a time in my life where I probably wouldn't have listened to my parents' advice, but to find good, influential people around me, right? And these in my life were my friends' parents. These were my other coaches, church leaders, perhaps, right? And so the role of a coach is so important because as a parent now of an adult son and teenage daughters, and is I just hope that somebody else who has the attention of my children will teach them and represent good values to them. And so the stewardship in my mind that a coach has is so massive. And so I just want to share that I'm so thankful that you take that seriously, and that's representative in your book, in the story that you tell, and in the way that you teach. So talk to me about accepting the stewardship of that, being that influence on people.
Yeah, I think it's funny because I was talking to a person earlier today, and he does some training with people, but it's not really his full time job. But they started calling him coach, and he said, "No, I'm not a coach," but he was. And what I shared with him is that you know what is one of the greatest honors because I still my community most people call me coach because I was a coach for so long. And to me, that's a tremendous honor because I think it is a real show of respect that people honor that you embrace this profession to try to help young people. So I took it very serious. I mean, early in my career, I had some things where I wasn't clear about who I was, but those are things as I really got clear about my personal mission, what my core values were, and trying to live those the best that I can with the idea that I am a human being. And when I screw up, I'm the ability to be vulnerable and share. And the other thing I really tried to talk to leaders about is I call it the CST. You got to be the chief storyteller. And you know what I always really try to emphasize, I would tell stories to my players almost every day. A lot of them about me, but some, or things like, because most of them are basketball players, is that, I might tell a story about a college basketball team or a pro basketball team and just trying to, but my stories were either usually warnings, things we probably shouldn't be doing, or examples, things we really should be following. And I think that's really important. The other thing is you mentioned, and I think it's really important to find people that you respect, that you learn from. And I had a local coach that actually I had two. And I'll tell you real quick. So the one was when I took over this small school for a couple of years. In the league, there was one guy, he was winning the championship every year. And the rest of the coaches couldn't stand him. It was jealousy because he was so good at what he did. Randy, I became best of friends with him because it's like, this guy knows what he's doing. I want to learn from him. And then I had another guy that ended up, was a basketball coach, then he went in administration. And he's the one that challenged me about being a model. In fact, my last 23 years, I decided not to drink alcohol during the season. And now I pretty much don't drink alcohol at all. But it was a challenge that he said to me, not that I was drinking a ton of alcohol, but I was kind of like, after a game, I go and have a few beers. And so that was another thing that really helped me. And then the last thing I'll say with that is there's so many great people. I learned in the world of basketball, I followed John Wooden's career, the great UCLA basketball coach. I read, if there's an interview, I'd listen to him and really try to pick up what he's trying to do. And then there was a guy in the personal growth or development, a guy named Jim Rohn that was Tony Robbins' first mentor. In fact, my wife always kidded when Jim Rohn passed away in 2009 that I could have kept going to his seminars because I listened to his words so much. But so the thing that I really try to help young people or people in general in being better leaders. If you want to be a great leader, study leadership. And that's why I've read a lot. I've listened to a lot of people in trying to, and then you have to figure out what's going to work best for you. You can't be, Jim Rohn or John Wooden, but you can learn from them and then incorporate what you think can work for you.
You said something that really hit me there, where this coach in town who became your friend and mentor.
Yeah.
Uh, Tell me if this feels right, but something that I observed in that is, yes, there's a lot of teams in town that are playing against this team that always wins, and there was jealousy. You specifically used the word jealousy. You identified that as, oh, they hate this guy because there's jealousy. That's something funny. Words matter. I think that the words matter, and they change our perspective, our possibility. They create barriers. They change the frequency of our emotion, and we need to take words seriously. Many years ago, my wife and I decided, and we continue doing this, of which words we use and which words we don't use. And one of the words we decided that we will not use is jealous. Because if I say this to somebody, I am so jealous. Like if you tell me something, I'm like, oh, I'm so jealous. Now, what I might mean or maybe be intending to say is, well, that is really cool. I wish I could do that. But the word, to me, is much more potent than that. And I think we're doing ourselves a disservice when we say that. Because instead, when I say the word, I'm so jealous, what I'm saying is, I'm mad that you have something I don't. Instead of, I am happy for you that you have something. Because then that can elevate my frequency and your frequency if I just change the words I use. I had an example of this when I was working with a client. I'm an attorney, and I helped him with his estate planning, his trusts, and so on. And he'd been a pilot his whole life, and he was retiring, and he was coming to sign some documents with me. And he says, "Oh, when we're leaving tomorrow to Hawaii, I bought a condo in Hawaii, and it's been my dream forever, and we're going to go spend the summer there," or something like that. And I said, "Oh, that is amazing. I am so happy for you." And he stood back, like he physically went back like this, like as if I had like pushed him or something. He says, "What did you say?" He says, "You are the first person to ever say that to me." I didn't even think of it until he responded that way. He says, "Anytime I talk to people about this, everybody says they're jealous." And it was years before that my wife and I specifically decided not to use that. And as soon as he left, I'm calling my wife. I'm like, "Guess what just happened today? I said I was happy for somebody, and he noticed," right? But for all this time, it had changed my response and my engagement and my joy with other people, because I sincerely became happy for them and with them. But look what happened to you with this coach. You became best friends, and your life was augmented and expanded instead of shut off. Look at the gate that we can close with the words we choose and the attitude we choose. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah. No, I just want to say that I really appreciate what you're saying, because I'm right with you. The power of words is so important, and you know what, Randy, I'll say one thing, that a transition in my life that definitely took me, because I was not this way when I was young. It was all about me. Was exactly what you just said, what you shared with a client. Is I say this a lot now. Hey, I'm really happy for you, but it's not something I started doing. I think when you can really make that transition to help others and thinking that way and being really happy with people that either you work with, or they just they really worked hard to accomplish something, to be happy for them, I think is something we got to share more often.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's inspiring. Okay, so I'm kind of stepping back into this vulnerability idea, because I think it's so powerful. Where I've expanded the most is when I've been willing to revisit my mistakes, my missteps, and where I've grown from them. And so, and part of that is the honesty and being vulnerable enough to notice those. And so, what are some moments that might have been painful for you, where, call it a mistake, a misstep, a learning moment, in your life that was really difficult for you, but that transformed you, or for which you're now grateful?
Well, it immediately jumps from my professional career would be when I lost that first teaching and coaching job, because, I had early on, I was an assistant coach, I had part-time teaching, and this is my first full-time, and now I'm a varsity basketball coach at 25. And then after 1 year, I'm no longer, and I had to go back and be a part-time coach, a part-time teacher, and it was really hard. And you know what? It was something that I really struggled with, where I wanted to blame everyone else. And that's when I really, I was taken under Coach Van Gundy's wing, and I really started understanding is that I'm in charge of me. And so that really got me thinking that I got to be the best me that I can be. And then the next transition is when, I got known as the coach that couldn't win the big one, because we started have winning seasons every year, and I couldn't understand it. And as I mentioned, I lost in front of my wife there. We lost for the sixth time in the semifinals. And then the JMAC game gave me, I think it was a gift from God for me. I think God was trying to share, because this was back in 2006. So I think, autism was just starting to become more prevalent. So I think it was a gift from God, and the fact that he was sharing that people with autism can do special things. So I think that was great. But it gave me the perspective of what I was really there for, and that's to help young people be the best they can be. And that changed my whole thing. We were talking about, what you had said, which I think is really special, is that, I'm very happy for you. And I started to change my whole thought. Like if I'd see one of my, coach from another school win a championship, I'd send them a personalized note, because I was happy for them. It's not something I did early in my life. So it was something that I vowed, but I really encourage people to find out who you are. The best thing that has happened to me is the fact that, in reflection is how can I make an impact on a daily basis to help others? And if I can do that, then it's been a good day for me.
So what, it's been 20 years since the JMAC game.
Yeah.
And that experience was yours independent of whether the world knew about it.
Mm-hmm.
And whether or not I had watched that 20 years ago or rewatched it this morning, which I did, and yes, I did cry again. But there's been 20 years since then, right? I see you smile just as big when you tell the story because it mattered that much to you.
Right.
But that moment was something then to inspire subsequent moments in the way that you engage, interact, respond now. And so
Right.
what can you tell us about kind of using these moments to propel us forward and to continue on this thing that's bigger than us?
It's like when I talk to quite a few people now that are trying to get in the speaking profession. And one of the things that, you hear in the speaking is having that signature story. But I tell them, right, that we all have signature stories. Not most stories are not going to blow up in all over the world like the one I was part of, right? But I think what my point being is that I became much more attuned to everyday life and the stories every day that you can pick up to inspire people, to warn people. I little sidelight, I'm a practicing Catholic, and my priest a few years ago brought me in. The deacons wanted some help in with their homilies and their sermons, and so there was about 10 of them. They had like 5 or 6 minutes, and everyone spoke. And about halfway through, I said, well, let me give you a little bit of input. And I said, what was one of the things that Jesus Christ was known for? And they kind of looked at me befuddled, because obviously he was known for quite a few things. I said, well, he was known as a master storyteller. And when you make a sermon, if you don't share a story, because stories is what people remember, whether it's something that was sad or inspiring or a little bit of both. And I think so that was something that I really, I had this, obviously this signature story, but then it really got me thinking of like all the other really neat things and some really trying things that I can learn from just for the everyday stories. And you just never know. Like Jason came back and volunteered in my program my last 9 years, and we won 5 more championships together. So I kid people, he's my good luck charm. But, we had some good players, but, I ended up having a player my last year that went to Vermont, which is, kind of a mid-major. He had a great career. And Randy, he ended up playing 2 years in the NBA. He plays over in Europe now. But I'm like, I got him to go to Houston, and I'm in the Houston arena watching one of my former players play professional basketball. I mean, it's just things that you just can't imagine can happen. So I think that one of the things I really encourage people is every day there's stories that we can learn from, and be willing to share those stories with others.
So I think that titles in so deeply with gratitude, because what I see with gratitude is it opens up my vision and my perspective to see things. If I can live with a heart and mind full of gratitude, I can notice those things. I can see the stories, the benefit, the blessing in all the little moments, right? And those moments are not little. They're impactful, right? So you said that everybody has that story. And you're right. One of my partners here at work, he always says that data informs, but stories transform.
Yeah, well
Right. And
said.
you're exactly right.
Yeah.
And so I think that if we can notice and practice, I share with people that gratitude is the fastest way to shift us into that mindset, because we're deliberately taking the moment to notice something we might have walked past or we might have not paid attention to. I'm opening a moment for myself to pause and reflect, and then to see and sit with those moments. Now I can see the things that already exist. They are there. They exist now. It is present. It exists here. It's not, I'm jealous of something that someone else has that I don't, that my life should have looked like this. It shifts us out of that way of thinking and into turning what we have into enough and more, right? So, Coach, this is so awesome. Thank you so much for sharing some time with us. And I encourage everybody to check out CoachJimJohnson.com, buy his book, be inspired by that. And Jim, do you have anything you'd like to, parting thoughts or advice for us?
Sure, absolutely. Two things that I started doing later in my life, but with your theme of your podcast, which I really admire about gratitude, is I started doing a gratitude journal, and it really made me capture. I do it at the end of every day, and I capture at least 3 things that I'm grateful for, and they could be as simple as just having dinner with my wife. But I think that's a really good practice that I wish I would have done much earlier, but I do it every day. The other thing that I think from because we hear so much in business and life about leadership as metrics, is I have a daily scoreboard, and there are different phases of my life. For example, one of them is my health. How did I do today? And I rate myself from 1 to 10, and it's just a little analysis every day on figuring out, how come I didn't reach a 10 today? What can I do to be a little bit better each day? So I think having a little bit of a daily scoreboard is another nice idea that I've picked up that, I try to talk to people about. So
wonderful advice. Keep a gratitude journal. Keep yourself accountable. A lot of the theme I hear with you, it's really just kind of radical personal accountability.
Right.
And just own it, be vulnerable, and then move on, accept and continue.
Yeah. Actually, the last thing I'll say is something I started with my young friend. We do accountability call every single week. And boy, I found that to be, he's 26 and I'm in my 60s. So it's a neat way to keep each other accountable. So I also highly recommend that to people, to find a partner you can talk to every week, just on a couple goals that you're trying to accomplish.
I echo that. I have several of those, and sometimes it stings, but it's always beautiful. And we love each other more deeply because we're willing to be honest about it. So,
Absolutely.
Coach, thank you so much, but not just for this hour, but for taking your mission and helping change people's lives, because I'm sure you've changed many that you know about, but even impact on those that you're not aware of. But you've impacted my life in just the short time we've known each other. So for that, I thank you. And everybody else, thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.